The wind crawled across the old farmhouse like a restless hand, brushing against loose shingles and whistling through cracked window frames. The place had once belonged to a school teacher named Eliza Warren, a woman known in the small town of Milford as quiet, polite, and almost impossibly unremarkable. If you asked anyone who lived within 10 miles of her home, they would have described her the way people describe wallpaper, something you only notice when it starts to peel. But no one, not even her closest neighbor, knew that inside those thin walls lay a collection of notebooks and handwritten letters that would reshape the most bizarre murder investigation the state had ever seen. Detective Mara Kellerman stepped onto the sagging front porch with a flashlight in hand, feeling the wood bow under her weight. It wasn't the first time she'd visited a scene abandoned after a sudden death, but something about this place felt different, too still, too quiet, as if the house was listening. An officer had warned her that the inside was a mess, but that word didn't begin to capture the chaos that awaited her when she opened the door. The air smelled like old paper, dust, and something faintly metallic. Books were stacked against the walls up to shoulder height, some open, some closed, all covered with scribbled notes. And in the center of the living room lay a single leather-bound diary resting on a wooden table as though it had been placed there intentionally. Mara didn't touch it yet. She scanned the room first, stepping carefully around stacks of loose paper curled at the edges. Every surface, tables, chairs, bookshelves, was covered with handwriting. Entire pages were filled, margin to margin, line after line, in a cramped script that looked like someone trying to hide secrets even as they wrote them. On the far wall hung a corkboard pinned with faded photographs and newspaper cutouts. Some showed smiling families, others showed missing people, and a few were crime scene photos. Each had a date written beside it in red ink. And yet, the strangest thing wasn't the photos or the diaries or the obsessive documentation filling the room. It was the absence of chaos around the body. Eliza Warren had been found lying in her bed upstairs, fully clothed, her hands folded neatly on her chest, like she had arranged herself. No sign of struggle, no forced entry, no note, but the coroner's report was clear. This was not natural death. A small amount of digitalis, enough to stop her heart, was found in her system, poisoned, quietly, intentionally. But who poisons a woman who lived alone, had no known enemies, taught third graders how to count fractions, and clipped coupons on Sunday afternoons? The answer to that question, the detectives quickly realized, was hidden somewhere in her writing. Mara finally approached the leather-bound diary on the table. She put on gloves, lifted the cover, and saw a date written at the top, January 3rd, 2023. The first entry was short, only 3 lines, but it sent a chill down her spine. He wrote again today, another letter, another confession. I thought he had stopped. I was wrong. He says he remembers everything. Mara reread the lines slowly. Confession? Remembers everything? Who is he? As she flipped to the next entry, the handwriting changed. It became shakier, more frantic. Some words were underlined multiple times, as if the writer feared they might be erased by the air around them. This second entry was longer, nearly a page, and mentioned a name, S.R. The initials appeared repeatedly, always surrounded by phrases like the letters, the memories he forces onto me, and the story he insists I keep for him. Theories sparked in Mara's mind, blackmail, obsession, delusion, but none felt complete. A creaking noise from upstairs broke her concentration. One of the officers stepped onto the landing. "Detective, you'll want to see the bedroom." Mara climbed the stairs, her flashlight cutting through the dimness. The bedroom was dim and cold, but neat, almost disturbingly so. The bed was made except for the indentation where the body had been. A single envelope sat on the pillow, addressed simply to the one who finds this. Mara opened it. Inside was a letter written in the same cramped handwriting. "If you are reading this, he has finally come for me. Do not believe what the files say about him. Do not believe what he wrote. His story is not the truth. It is the trap. A trap? But what trap, and who was he? Another officer called from the hallway. "Detective Kellerman, you should see what's in this closet." Inside the bedroom closet was something far more disturbing than clothes. Dozens of shoeboxes were stacked on the floor. Each was labeled with a date and a victim's name, names Mara recognized from unsolved cases going back nearly 20 years. Inside each box were letters, hundreds of them, all handwritten, all signed with the same initials, SR. Mara picked up one letter and read the opening line. "I watched her again today. I know you don't approve of my methods, but someone has to do the work you won't." Another letter. "You said you would help me finish the story. Don't pretend you don't remember." And another. "The next one screams like the last. I hope you're keeping track." Mara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the horror settle. Was Eliza being manipulated by a killer? Was she being forced to document crimes? Or more disturbing, was she participating? The letters didn't make it clear. They spoke to her as if she were an accomplice, but her diary suggested she was a victim. Two narratives, two voices, one truth buried under endless paper. Downstairs, another officer shouted, "Detective Kellerman, we found something under the floorboards." Mara hurried down to the living room where a patch of floor had been pried up. Beneath it was a metal box sealed with a heavy latch. Inside the box was a final diary, this one older, yellowed at the edges, and wrapped in twine. The first page was dated 2004. The handwriting inside wasn't Eliza's. It was sharper, more confident, almost elegant. It was signed Samuel Reddick. Mara froze. Samuel Reddick had been the prime suspect in 3 disappearances back in the early 2000s, but they never found enough evidence to charge him. He had vanished shortly afterward, leaving his family, his job, and his entire life behind. And now, inside this farmhouse, lay his diary. The opening entry read, "She is the only one who understands what I have to do. She listens, she remembers, she writes everything I say." The next entries chronicled his movements, his victims, his philosophies, but the last entry, the one written in darker ink, the one that looked smeared as if written in haste, was dated 5 years after Samuel had supposedly disappeared. "She betrayed me. She thinks she can rewrite the story. She thinks she can decide what happened. If she changes the truth, she dies." Mara's heart dropped as she connected the pieces. Samuel wasn't dead. He had been visiting Eliza for years. He had been using her to document his crimes, and now, after she tried to rewrite the narrative, he had killed her. But where was he now, and what else had she written before her death? Behind her, the wind pushed hard against the side of the house, rattling the windows like something trying to get in, or trying to get out. The rain had softened into a steady hiss against the farmhouse roof, a backdrop so constant it felt like the house itself was breathing. Detective Mara Lenton stood in the center of Eliza Corwin's bedroom, still holding the final diary page from scene 1. Its last sentence burned into her mind. "If you find this, tell them the house lied to me." That line refused to settle logically. Houses didn't lie, people did. And yet Eliza had written those words with a trembling desperation that felt too real to ignore. Mara exhaled slowly and lowered the page. "Rodriguez," she called out, her voice controlled but uneasy, "bring the ultraviolet lamp. I want to check the walls." Detective Joel Rodriguez entered a moment later, stomping muddy water off his boots. "You think she left more writing?" "I think," Mara answered, sweeping the beam of her flashlight across the peeling wallpaper, "Eliza wrote a lot more than what we found neatly collected in her journals. I think she wrote wherever she could." Rodriguez clicked on the UV lamp, and the room washed in ghostly violet. Mara stepped back. The walls shimmered, first blank, then, as the seconds passed, faint smudges emerged, then shapes, then lines, then entire sentences. Whole sections of the wall were covered in frantic handwriting, layered on top of itself, looping, crossing, spiraling out like branches of a chaotic tree. "What the hell?" Rodriguez muttered, stepping closer. Mara didn't answer. Her throat tightened as she read the phrases scattered across the walls, written in a different hand than the calm, coherent diary entries they'd found earlier. "He is not who he says he is. Eyes in the floorboards. The truth moves at night. Stop reading, stop reading, stop reading. Do not trust the heartbeats that are not your own." And in the far corner, squeezed into a patch of wall just above the baseboard, "The killer lives inside the story." Rodriguez flinched. She was losing it. "Or someone wanted us to think she was," Mara replied. "Look at the handwriting. It shifts. Some parts slant right, others left. Pressure changes, depth changes." She leaned closer, tracing one line with a gloved finger. "It's like either she wrote these during different psychological states, or someone else wrote some of it," Rodriguez finished. Mara nodded once. Behind them, the wind pressed against the window pane, rattling it sharply. The farmhouse groaned as though pushing back. Mara turned abruptly toward the sound, eyes narrowing. "Did you hear that?" Rodriguez swallowed. "Old house, nothing more." But Mara wasn't convinced. The shift in air pressure felt wrong, like someone walking past them unseen, carrying cold air in their wake. She folded her arms. "We need to search the rest of the rooms, especially anywhere someone could hide journals or letters. Eliza was leaving messages everywhere. People only do that when they're desperate to document something no one will believe." They moved into the hallway, the floorboards creaking under their weight. Mara clicked on a second flashlight that cast a sharper contrast against the dim corridor. Dozens of family photographs lined the walls. Eliza as a child, Eliza with her parents, Eliza in her college graduation gown. But in every picture, the background seemed off. Shadows in corners that didn't match the lighting, blurred shapes behind furniture, things that may have been tricks of the camera or may have been something else. Rodriguez noticed the same thing. These photos look like something's hiding in them. Mara didn't respond. She was already moving toward the end of the hallway, toward a nearly invisible door, partially concealed by an old quilt hung on the wall. "Did you map this room on the blueprint?" Rodriguez frowned. "No, we saw 4 bedrooms. That should be it." "This makes a 5th, Mara said quietly. "Help me move the quilt." As they peeled it aside, dust rained down from the top, and the door underneath came fully into view. It wasn't a normal bedroom door. It was narrow, like a closet, and painted a color that nearly blended with the paneling. Mara tested the knob, cold, stiff, but unlocked. She opened it. A staircase descended into darkness, a staircase not listed on the official floor plan. Rodriguez inhaled sharply. A hidden basement? Not exactly hidden, just forgotten or intentionally omitted. She began descending, each step groaning in protest, her flashlight beam cut through the dark. Rodriguez followed close behind, one hand on the railing, the other resting near the holster of his gun. As they reached the bottom, the beam revealed a cramped space, bare concrete walls, a single wooden table, and dozens of papers scattered across the floor. Mara crouched and picked up the first sheet. It was a torn-out page from another diary, not the ones they found upstairs. This one was older, edges browned, ink faded. She read aloud, "He has been in the walls again, listening, breathing with me. I think he is writing back." Rodriguez stiffened. Writing back? What does that even mean? But Mara wasn't listening. She grabbed a second page, then a third, each one more unsettling than the last. "I saw him through the crack in the floorboards. His eyes were mine. He says he knows what I did, but I don't remember doing anything. The story won't let me leave." Mara dropped the pages. "Rodriguez," she said slowly, This isn't schizophrenia. This is narrative entanglement. Rodriguez blinked. What? Mara steadied herself. I've seen this once before. Victims leaving messages not because they're hallucinating, but because they believe they're trapped in a repeating pattern created by someone else, someone manipulating their environment to make them question their sanity. You think she was being stalked? I think someone was influencing her, maybe writing to her, maybe leaving things in the house. Rodriguez scanned the small basement anxiously. This place is too tight, too quiet. If someone hid down here... Mara cut him off. Look, she pointed at a corner behind the table. Rodriguez lifted his flashlight. There, buried beneath a layer of dust, was an old metal lockbox. Mara dragged it out. It was heavy, dented, and sealed with a rusted latch. She forced it open with a screwdriver, and inside lay a stack of folded letters tied with black twine. The envelopes were addressed not to Eliza, but to the house itself. House of Corwin, attention, the watching room. Rodriguez swore under his breath. Somebody was sending letters to the house? Or to whoever lived in it, or whatever they believed lived inside it. She opened the first letter. The handwriting was elegant, confident. You won't escape. I chose you because you notice too much. You listen too closely. You walk the halls like you know the past is alive. But remember, I write the truth here. You just read it. Mara felt her stomach drop. Second letter. You're becoming my favorite story. Don't disappoint me the way the others did. Third letter. When the time comes, you'll understand why someone had to die. Rodriguez shook his head, backing away slightly. Who wrote these, and why? Mara stood slowly, clutching the letters. This wasn't just a stalker. This was a manipulator. Someone wanted Eliza to feel like she was living inside a story someone else authored, a psychological trap, a narrative cage. Rodriguez rubbed his forehead. But why kill her? Why go this far? Mara turned her flashlight back toward the staircase. Because whoever wrote these wanted control, complete control. And when Eliza started documenting everything, when she started realizing the lies, when she began writing back, she let the silence answer the rest. Rodriguez swallowed. We need to take this to the lab. We will, but first... A sudden thump from upstairs froze both of them. Then another, slow, heavy. Someone was walking across the second floor. Mara exchanged a look with Rodriguez, both drawing their weapons at once. We cleared the house, Rodriguez whispered, voice taut. No, Mara whispered, eyes narrowing. We thought we cleared the house. They climbed the stairs in near silence. Each step felt longer than the last. When they reached the top, Mara paused, letting the sound guide her. The footsteps were coming from Eliza's bedroom, but when they stepped inside, the room was empty, completely still, except the writing on the walls had changed. Mara's breath hitched. New words had appeared, still glowing under the fading ultraviolet light. Not written in fear, written calmly, deliberately. Just 4 chilling words. I am still here. The words I am still here glowed faintly on the wall, pulsing like a heartbeat as Mara and Rodriguez froze at the threshold of the bedroom. The ultraviolet beam flickered, and for a split second, Mara thought the letters moved, just slightly, like ink shifting under skin. But when she blinked, they were still. The silence in the room tightened around them. There was no movement, no open windows, no footsteps to chase. Yet someone had added those words while they were downstairs, reading Eliza's secret letters. Mara inhaled slowly, trying not to let the rising dread cloud her thinking. This was not a haunting, she reminded herself. This was a human threat, a calculated intrusion meant to unsettle them. But even as she repeated that logic, something colder pressed against it. The pacing upstairs had been too deliberate, too heavy, almost theatrical, like someone wanted them to hear it. like they were part of the performance. She stepped closer to the writing, examining the strokes. The ink was fresh, still tacky. Whoever wrote it couldn't have gotten far. Rodriguez checked the closet, then under the bed, waving his flashlight with nervous precision. "No one's here," he muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. No fresh footprints on the hallway floor either. Mara studied the pattern of dust on the wooden boards. Rodriguez was right. No new marks, no smudges, nothing disturbed, and yet the writing existed. The contradiction felt like the house was mocking them. Mara reached for the window, testing the latch. It was still sealed from the inside, no sign of tampering. "We're not dealing with a random intruder," she whispered. "This person knows the house. They know its sound, its structure, where they can move without being heard." Rodriguez swallowed hard. Or they're not moving at all. Maybe they never left. The idea hung between them like damp air. Mara didn't want to entertain it, but she couldn't deny the possibility. The hidden basement wasn't the only place someone could have lived. Farmhouses like this were built with crawl spaces, sealed-off lofts, gaps in the walls wide enough for someone to slide through. Someone thin, malnourished, desperate. Someone who enjoyed watching. She motioned for Rodriguez to follow her back downstairs. The farmhouse felt heavier now, as if someone unseen was leaning against its beams, listening to every breath. Mara kept her hand on her holstered gun as they descended, but the tension only grew. They reached the living room, and her eyes immediately caught something new. The coffee table, once covered in dust, now had a smudged circle in the center, as if someone had leaned on it. There were faint fingerprints, elongated, too slender for Rodriguez, not hers. The intruder wanted them to notice. Mara crouched. "He was here while we were upstairs," she said, voice low, "watching." Rodriguez shuddered. "Then where the hell is he now?" Mara didn't answer. Instead, she stepped toward the old armchair by the fireplace, noticing a sheet of paper resting on the cushion, white, clean, untouched by the dust coating everything else. She lifted it with gloved fingers. It wasn't a diary page. It wasn't part of the letters. It was something else entirely. A single sentence written in the same elegant handwriting they found in the lockbox. "You finally turned the page." Her pulse quickened. This wasn't left for Eliza. This was left for them. Someone was writing to the investigators now, continuing the narrative. Mara felt something sharp twist in her stomach. This case wasn't just about a murder. It was about authorship. Someone wanted to control the story itself, past, present, and future. She scanned the room, mentally reconstructing possible hiding places. Behind walls, inside vents, above the ceiling panels. Old farmhouses were labyrinths. Mara motioned for Rodriguez to sweep the ground level while she observed the architecture more closely. Every creak felt intentional now. Every draft felt like breath. Mara traced her flashlight along the edges of the ceiling until something caught the beam. A thin line, almost invisible, running straight across the plaster. The ceiling panel wasn't flush. Something had shifted. Before she could investigate, Rodriguez called from the kitchen. "Mara, you need to see this." She followed the sound of his voice and found him standing at the open pantry door. The shelves were empty, save for a single object placed dead center of the middle shelf, a pocket-sized voice recorder. Rodriguez held a handkerchief over his mouth. "Do we touch it?" Mara nodded. "Bag it first." He slipped it into an evidence bag, then pressed play. At first, nothing, just static, then a soft scrape, then breathing, slow, steady, far too controlled to be accidental, and then a voice, calm, deep, unnervingly steady, spoke directly into the recorder, as though making a confession to an audience of one. She wasn't meant to find the letters. She wasn't meant to write her own chapters. Mara felt her pulse spike. The voice continued. "You read the walls, didn't you? You read her fear, and now you're reading mine. Good. That means you're learning how this story works." Rodriguez's eyes widened with horror. Then the voice shifted, becoming almost amused. The house told her things. It's telling you things too, but you won't listen yet. The recording ended abruptly. Mara stood still for several long seconds, the rain hammering against the kitchen window like frantic knuckles. "He's taunting us," she whispered. "He wants us to feel like we're inside the story he's writing." Rodriguez nodded reluctantly. "But why would he record his voice? Isn't that evidence against him?" Mara shook her head. "Not if he wants us to hear it. Not if the evidence is part of the narrative he's crafting." They moved through the house again, searching for more clues, but Mara's instincts were pulling her back towards the basement. Something in those letters bothered her. The phrasing, the tone, the references to others. When they descended again, she started organizing the pages chronologically on the table. As she worked, the story that emerged was far darker than she imagined. The earliest letters were fond, praising. The writer seemed to admire Eliza in a disturbingly intimate way, but over time, the tone shifted, growing colder, more controlling. He began criticizing her decisions, then her thoughts, then her reality. By the final letters, he wasn't just controlling her story, he believed he owned her life. He left rules, instructions, warnings, and Eliza, isolated on the quiet farm, had no one to turn to. Rodriguez leaned over her shoulder. He groomed her through letters? Worse, Mara murmured. He manipulated her perception until she questioned the boundary between writer and reader, between truth and fiction. She started believing that someone else was writing her life. And once she believed that, Rodriguez finished for her. He didn't need to be in the room to control her. Just then, something caught Mara's eye. A narrow slit along the far wall, a seam. She ran her fingers along it, feeling cold air seep through. "There's a hollow behind here," she said. Rodriguez retrieved a crowbar, and together they pried the panel loose. It fell forward, revealing a cramped, windowless cavity. Inside were blankets, empty food cans, a water bottle, a stack of notebooks. Someone had been living inside the walls, recently. Rodriguez stepped back, horrified. He was in here, watching her, listening to her, maybe even writing the things she found. Mara swallowed the bile rising in her throat. He lived behind the wall, like a parasite, feeding off her fear. She stepped inside the cramped space and picked up one of the notebooks. It was filled with meticulous entries, observations of Eliza's movements, her routines, her conversations with herself. He documented the progression of her mental unraveling. But at the very back of the notebook, one line stood alone. "She finally saw me." Mara felt the words hit her like a blunt strike. She flipped the page. The next line was worse. "She wasn't supposed to scream." Her chest tightened. "Rodriguez," she whispered, "this wasn't just psychological manipulation. He confronted her, face to face." Rodriguez's voice shook. "Does that mean she saw her killer?" Mara closed the notebook. Not just saw him, she recognized him. Rodriguez froze. "What makes you think that?" Mara pointed to the final entry written in the notebook. The handwriting was larger, more frantic than before, as though written quickly, almost angrily. "I had to rewrite the ending." Before Rodriguez could speak, they heard it again, the creaking of floorboards above them, slow and methodical. Mara lifted her gun, and Rodriguez did the same. But this time, instead of fear, something else filled the air. Purpose, clarity. The killer wasn't gone. He had been waiting for the right chapter to begin. The detectives returned to the evidence room the next morning, carrying with them a restless unease that had settled over the station. The final pages of the diary, those near hysterical confessions hinting at yet another victim, had changed everything. But what disturbed them more was the phrasing, not a confession of a murder already done, but one spoken like a plan, a promise, as if the killer were writing directly to whoever would one day read it. Detective Armand sat at the metallic desk, the diary open before him, and stared at the last paragraph written in frantic, slanted strokes. It didn't read like the words of someone reminiscing. It read like someone preparing for an encore, someone who believed their diary was not a journal, but a prophecy, and that prophecy was not yet fulfilled. He flipped the page back again, retracing the earlier entries for patterns, emotional spikes, obsessiveness, fixations. The killer wrote about the first victim as an awakening, the second as a confirmation, and the third as inevitable. But for the fourth, the language changed. The killer didn't describe a target, they described a witness, someone who had wronged them, someone they believed was destined to appear again. It was as if the killer had shaped their entire life around this unknown fourth figure, constructing fantasies of confrontation and revenge, a person who existed in their mind long before they ever met them in reality. Detective Armand exhaled slowly. "This isn't about victims," he murmured to himself. "It's about a story they think they're writing, a story they refuse to end." Detective Sana stepped in, holding a thin folder filled with transcripts. "We traced the handwriting," she said. "Not matched, but similar patterns. A teacher from the school remembers a student who wrote exactly like this. Tall letters, upward slant, heavy pressure." Her eyes tightened. "He dropped out 15 years ago after something happened, something bad." Armand looked up. "What happened?" "His mother's death," Sana whispered. "He wrote letters then, too, letters the school counselor never forgot." A chill swept through Armand's spine. So the diary was not just an outlet, it was a continuation of a lifelong habit, using words to shape reality, to relive pain, to justify violence. The killer had been speaking the same language since adolescence. Sana slid a transcript across the desk. And there's more. The last entry in the diary, it matches almost word for word a letter the boy wrote when he was 16, a letter addressed to a future witness, a person he said would come into his life at the exact right moment, a partner in fate. Armand froze. Which means the killer didn't just write the diary as they killed, they wrote it as they grew. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the truth sinking deeper. They weren't hunting someone who turned into a murderer overnight. They were tracking someone who had been writing this narrative for decades, slowly sculpting themselves into the monster they believed they were destined to become. Someone who saw murder not as an action, but as a role they were born to play. Sana hesitated before continuing. "There's something else. The school counselor said the boy was obsessed with diaries, not his own. Other people's. He stole them, he read them, he rewrote them. He believed diaries were the only places where people told the truth, and he said that one day, he swallowed, he would write a diary the world could not ignore." Armand closed the diary slowly, as though sealing something poisonous inside. "He wants an audience," he said. "He wants someone to read him." "And he wants someone to answer," Sana added. A cold silence filled the room. Both knew what she meant. This diary was written for them. That night, Armand found himself unable to sleep. The killer's words replayed through his mind like a whispering echo. The descriptions of each murder were disturbingly intimate, far more detailed than necessary. They felt almost theatrical, as if the killer had staged each killing for the future retelling alone, not for the violence, but for the storytelling. He turned on his lamp and reopened the diary. A particular entry drew him in, not about a victim, but about writing itself. The killer wrote, "Diaries are more honest than people. People lie. Diaries do not. If someone reads mine, they'll finally understand. And once they understand, they'll see why it all had to happen." Armand muttered under his breath, "You want to be understood or admired?" But the deeper he read, the more troubling the pattern became. The killer frequently wrote about mirroring, reflecting, copying, becoming other people to get close to them. They didn't just commit murders, they studied their victims first, writing about them as if rehearsing their identities. They imitated speech patterns, clothing choices, routines. They lived a series of borrowed lives. Then, in one chilling passage, the killer confessed, "I can only write what I steal. I can only become what I observe. But the fourth will write me. They will give me my ending." Armand closed the book sharply. "You're not writing an ending," he said aloud to the empty room. "You're trying to trap someone in your story." He didn't realize until later how true that statement was. By morning, new evidence arrived that deepened the case even further. A neighbor of the suspected former student had come forward. They remembered seeing him burning something behind his house several times over the years, stacks of papers thrown into metal barrels. Not trash, not newspapers, something more personal. More diaries, Sana guessed grimly. Or letters, Armand added, letters he didn't want found. But one detail from the neighbor's statement chilled them both. The neighbor claimed the man smiled whenever he burned the papers, not a normal smile, a satisfied one, as though he were finishing a ritual, destroying chapters that were no longer useful. She described him standing before the flames like an author closing a book after writing the final line. Sana rubbed her temples. He was editing his life. Armand nodded. Editing evidence. But then came the twist. The neighbor said she had once seen him drop something while burning the papers, a small notebook, half charred, that he didn't notice falling from the barrel's edge. She didn't think much of it when it fell, and kicked it into a corner of her shed for kindling. But now, after hearing the police inquiry, she realized it might matter. When the officers retrieved it, Armand felt his pulse spike. It was another diary, a different one, earlier, older, written in the same hand but more youthful, less controlled, less polished. Yet inside the patterns were unmistakable. The boy detailed fantasies of becoming someone else, slipping into other lives, copying their routines until they felt indistinguishable. There were entire pages dedicated to rewriting the endings of other people's diaries he had stolen as a teen, imagining how their stories should have ended if he had control. And then there was a page near the end, a page titled, "The Witness I Will Create." The entry described someone who didn't exist yet, someone he would force into his story, not a victim, but a reader, someone who would pick up his diary and understand him better than anyone else could ever, someone who would finish the story with him, a partner, or an enemy. He didn't seem to care which. Armand felt the air escape his chest as he read the final line of that page. "They will read this someday. They will come find me, and they will know what I am." Sana looked over his shoulder, her voice a whisper. "He wrote this for us." Armand slowly lifted his gaze from the page. "No," he said, "not for us." And then the realization hit both of them at the exact same moment. The killer hadn't just been waiting for someone to read his diary. He had been waiting for the police to read it. He had been writing the entire story with detectives as his eventual audience. The fourth witness wasn't a person from his childhood, or a future partner, or a stranger he would encounter one day. It was whoever investigated his murders, whoever picked up his diary, whoever chased him, whoever he forced to follow the path he wrote, step by step, until they reached him. Armand's throat tightened. Sana's face went pale, because that meant one thing. The diary was not a confirmation. It was an invitation, and they had already accepted it. The storm began just before dusk, the kind that rolls in without warning, swallowing the sky in a bruised purple haze. Detectives Armin and Sana drove in silence, the diary resting between them on the center console like a living thing, its pages still open to the last entry they had read. The words haunted the air of the car. "They will come find me. and they will know what I am." It no longer felt like a prediction, it felt like a directive, and they were heading straight into it. The old address they tracked down belonged to a small, decaying farmhouse 30 miles outside the city, isolated among skeletal trees and uneven fields. It had once belonged to the killer's mother before she died, before everything unraveled. The house sat half collapsed, windows boarded, the front door hanging crooked like a broken jaw. Even from a distance, Armin felt the presence of something wrong. Not a supernatural wrong, just a deep, rotting silence that seemed to pulse with memory. They stepped out of the car into thick mud. The air smelled of rain, wet wood, and something metallic. A faint light flickered inside the house, just visible through a crack in the boarded windows. "He's here," Sana whispered. Armin didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both felt it. As they approached, they noticed something under the porch. Scraps of burned paper, the charred edges curling like black petals. Diary pages, dozens of them. The killer had been burning more entries, maybe recent ones, maybe rewriting the ending even now. Armin swallowed hard. "He's cleaning his story," he murmured, "just like before." They pushed open the door. It groaned like a dying animal. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and a strange sweetness like spoiled perfume. A single lantern glowed on the table in the center of the room, surrounded by piles of notebooks, some intact, some torn, some burned at the edges, like drafts of a novel, like the archives of a lifetime spent rewriting reality. And then they saw him, sitting calmly in a wooden chair, back straight, hands folded neatly in his lap. His hair was longer now, streaked with gray. His posture was eerily composed, as if he had expected them not just today, but for years. He looked up slowly, his eyes shining with something between delight and recognition. "You read it. I knew you would." Armin's instinct was to reach for his weapon, but something in the killer's expression froze him. Not fear, not arrogance, something else. Anticipation, like a writer awaiting the critics of his final draft. "You led us here," Sana said, her voice steady but cold. The man smiled faintly. "Of course I did. A story needs an audience and an ending." Armin stepped forward. 4 victims, all because you wanted a narrative? The man tilted his head thoughtfully. 4, he asked. "Are you certain?" The room seemed to contract with tension. Sana's breath caught. "What do you mean by that?" The killer's smile widened, a strange, serene expression, as if he were delivering the twist in a book he had painstakingly crafted. "You read the diary, but did you understand it?" His gaze flickered toward the piles of burned notebooks. "I wrote more than one life, more than one ending. Some are finished, some still wait." Armin felt ice slide through his chest. "Where are they?" The man simply closed his eyes. "Gone," he whispered, but remembered. They didn't know what he meant. Not yet. Armin stepped closer, but the killer didn't resist. Instead, he looked almost relieved. "You came," he murmured, "just like I wrote." Sana clenched her jaw. "You didn't write us. We followed evidence." He opened his eyes and met hers with unsettling calm. "Evidence I created. Evidence I shaped. The diary was not a confession. It was my outline. And you followed it perfectly." Armin felt something dangerous rising inside him, anger mixed with the unsettling realization that the killer believed every word he said. "You think you control everything," Armin said, "but you slipped. That's why we're here." "No," the killer replied softly. "You're here because I chose to end the story." Silence fell like a curtain. They brought him back to the station under heavy security, but he never struggled, never protested. He sat quietly in the interrogation room, hands folded, eyes wandering the walls as if reading invisible text. Sana stood behind the glass panel with Armin, studying him with tight, controlled fury. "He's not done," she said. "He's not telling us everything." Armin nodded. "He wants us to ask. He wants to reveal things at his pace, like chapters." Inside the room, an officer placed a water bottle in front of the killer. He didn't touch it. Instead, he glanced down at the table and smiled. Someone had set the diary in front of him. "You shouldn't have brought it in here," Sana muttered. "He'll use it." The killer looked directly at the one-way mirror as if he could see them. His gaze locked onto Armin's reflection. Then he pushed the diary gently with one finger. An invitation. When they stepped inside, the killer straightened. "Detectives," he said warmly, "you came to read the final chapter." Armin ignored the bait. "Tell us about the others, the victims you wrote about but didn't name." "They weren't victims," the killer said, almost offended. "They were characters." Sana leaned forward. "You murdered them." "I finished their arcs," he corrected calmly. "They lived chaotic, meaningless lives. I gave them endings with purpose, with clarity. A story is only as good as its conclusion." Armin clenched his fists. "And the fourth, the witness, who is it?" The killer smiled faintly. "You've met them." Every muscle in Armin's body tensed. "Who?" "You'll know when they write back." Sana's eyes widened. "Write back?" The killer nodded gently. "Every good story inspires another. That's how patterns form. One writer begets another." Armin's voice turned sharp. "You're talking about a copycat?" "A storyteller," the killer said. "Someone who will continue the narrative. Someone who has already begun." The room grew impossibly still. Armin leaned in. "Give us a name." The killer's smile faded, not into fear, but into something much colder. "No," he said simply. "That would spoil the sequel." By nightfall, the storm intensified again. Armin stood outside the precinct, staring at the flashing lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Sana joined him, her coat pulled tight. "He's lying," she said, "or exaggerating, trying to scare us." Armin didn't answer. She continued, "Even if someone admired him, tried to mimic him, he doesn't know that for sure." Armin still didn't speak. "Armin?" she finally asked. He slowly exhaled. "He knew the exact moment we found the diary," he said quietly. "He wrote about us before we even met him. He predicted our steps. He predicted our reactions. And he predicted that we'd come after him." Sana frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Armin whispered just above the rain, "he didn't choose us to read his diary. He wrote it for someone else." He turned toward her, voice barely audible above the rain. "He wrote it for a someone who's already reading it." Sana's face paled. "A partner?" Armin nodded. "No, a successor." They both looked back toward the interrogation room window. He was sitting there still as a statue, smiling faintly as if savoring the final paragraph of a story only he understood. The detectives realized then that catching him hadn't ended anything. It had only begun a new chapter, a darker one, a wider one, because somewhere out there, someone had already picked up his diary and begun to write.